Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. This episode of Slam the Gavel is sponsored by CPS Protect Consulting Services. A child protective services case is one of the most frightening experiences for any parent. Don't face it alone. Face it with confidence with Urgent Assist by CPS Protect. You can have access to former CPS investigators to make sure you preserve your rights and protect your family. If you're facing CPS involvement and aren't sure where to turn, their child welfare consultants can help you. Visit cpsprotect.com/subscribe and enter the coupon code Slam the Gavel for 10% off your first year of Urgent Assist. And this is available in all 50 states. I have another announcement. Bradley's mother, Narcisse Golan, passed away 5 months ago. Bradley is autistic and needs structured routine therapies he receives for his autism 6 days a week. However, Italy just entrusted Bradley to Italian social services. If he is ruled to go back, he will face the next 3 to 4 years in the Italian foster care system where he can't speak or understand the language. He will then be taken away from the only family he has ever known. Please call Governor Hochul, New York State at 518-474-8390. That's Governor Hochul, 518-474-8390. And please reach out to the senator as well to please keep Bradley here safe in these United States. Hashtag keep Bradley safe. I have a return guest on. I'm happy to have Brian Vukadinovich back on. He's an author. The last time he was on was April 1st of 2023, season 4, episode 69, where we talked about judicial reform, judicial bias, and self-representation. But today we're going to talk about his case against Posner from Federal Court of Appeals. Posner is a Federal Court of Appeals judge, 7th Circuit in Chicago. And Posner had Brian work for him for a period of time, but he just didn't pay Brian Vukadinovich what he owed him. So I welcome you to the podcast, Brian. How are you doing?
Hi, Marianne. Great to be back on the show with you. Thanks for the invite back. Appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad to have you back. So what is this? This sounds really too bad that he's just not paying you.
Yeah, it's really very disheartening. It's Richard A. Posner. He was a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit in Chicago for almost 36 years. And, to be quite honest, during that entire time period, he really wasn't. He's really recognized as a giant in the legal community. Anybody involved with the law knows the name Richard Posner for sure. And all those years, he kind of played ball with the other basically conservative judges on the 7th Circuit and had a history of ruling against individual litigants and so forth and siding with corporations and government agencies. For almost 36 years, he did that. And then towards the end of his career, he woke up and saw the light and decided that the judges at the 7th Circuit were they were mistreating the pro ses at the 7th Circuit, and he said he didn't like it. He publicly made that statement. In fact, he said that the judges at the 7th Circuit considered the pro se litigants as trash. Those were his public words. And then he decided to retire from the federal judiciary, and then he founded a company called the Posner Center of Justice for pro ses, where he was going to help pro ses and so forth with their cases and all of this and all of that. So then at some point, he had read that I won a federal civil rights jury trial in March of 2016. I represented myself in a federal court case against my employer. It was a 5-day jury trial in U.S. District Court in Hammond, Indiana. And it was a 5-day jury trial. And at the end, after everything was said and done, and I represented myself from day one to from the filing of the case to the closing arguments in the case. And then the jury ruled in my favor, determined that the corporation violated my due process rights when it terminated my employment, and it awarded me a little over $200,000. Mm-hmm. So that made big news. It was nationally published and so forth. And then Posner read about it and contacted me and said, "Hey, I heard about how you won your case representing yourself. I'm upset at what's going on in the judiciary, particularly in the Seventh Circuit with the judges. They're abusing the pro ses, they're treating them as trash and so forth. And I would like for you to come on board and work with me and for me." So at the beginning, I was a little leery of it because I knew of his past history as a judge, how he was actually part of that entire problem with trashing the pro ses for 35 years or so, which he publicly pretty much acknowledged. In fact, he said he awoke to a slumber, he called it, in his starting his after 35 years. He said he awoke in a slumber and realized what the judges were doing to the pro ses was wrong. And then he left the judiciary, started that company. And then, so I thought, well, maybe this is legitimate. Maybe he saw the light here. He did make some public statements as he did. So, let me think about this and, let me give him the benefit of the doubt. So I did. I thought about it and I said, okay, let's do it. So then he offered me a position as the executive director of the center. And initially it was in an email. It was written in an email. And he said that he should be able to pay me at least $80,000 a year. And his words, possibly more. So then that was on February 25th of 2018. So then I accepted his offer to work for him. And then shortly thereafter, on March 19th, 2018, he asked me to come to Chicago and meet with him. So we had a meeting and we renegotiated the figure to $120,000. And he asked me if I would be willing to wait. He said his money was all tied up and so forth, if I would be willing to wait at least a year to be paid and so forth. And I agreed to it. I'm retired and most of the work was going to be from home and so forth. And so I agreed to it. So I worked for him for well past a year and did a lot of work. I mean, I put hours and hours and hours every day. I mean, I've got a mountain of evidence showing how much work I did for him, and he was extremely pleased with my work. Told me so several times in emails and so forth. Called me to come to Chicago for meetings, and we did all of those things. I spent a lot of time and working, helping with pro ses and so forth. And he also asked me, in addition to working as the executive director, to also work for him as an advisor, because he was doing things that he thought that I could help him with in terms of advice, because he knew that how I was handling some things on my own end and how I was handling judiciary things. He had a big beef with the chief judge of the Seventh Circuit in Chicago. Her name is Diane Wood. They had a real big beef about several things, and there was a lot of turmoil between both of them and so forth. So we talked about that a lot and so forth, how we should handle that and so forth. And then and he was writing books and all of those kinds of things. So we talked about a lot of those things. He asked me for my opinion about a lot of things. So, but then when it was all said and done, the time came, to pay for my work. So I sent him a letter, I sent him an email, didn't hear anything back from him. So it was like, well, he blew me off here. He used me for all the work I did and he blew me off. And then I received an email, or no, a letter actually from a lawyer representing him The lawyer's name was Robert Kaufman from Chicago. The letter was on February 28th, 2022. And Kaufman says to me, quote, medical evidence will show that the judge did not have the legal capacity to enter into contracts in 2018. And then he went on to say that any contract for services would have been an obligation of the center, of the Posner Center, and not an individual obligation of the judge. Well, that's bogus, and everybody knows it because Posner in 2018 he was writing books, he was doing interviews. In fact, in 2019, a year after this statement was made, he actually took a job himself as an advisor with some legal company out of California. So to say that he did not have the legal capacity to enter into contracts when it came time to pay up for my work, that's nonsense. And they know it. And as far as the obligation, my agreement with him was with Posner. It was not with the Posner Center. It was with Posner off of his email and our personal conversations between each other. It was not with the Posner Center. Everything was from him and by him. Right. So that's all nonsense. So what I had to do, so then I received an email from his wife, Charlene, on May 8th, 2022, which was shortly after the letter that I received from his lawyer, Robert Kaufman. And then she stated in the email, well, she offered to give me $10,000. So I thought, well, he owes me $170,000 for all of the work that I did for him. I prorated it by the month, the $120,000 salary, and I prorated it. And after all of the months I worked for him, it comes out to $170,000. So I politely told her, I can't do it. He owes me $170,000. So, the $10,000 was basically, to me, almost a payoff. Let me give you $10,000 and then we won't have to deal with this, but we are going to deal with it because a contract is a contract.
And why would he send, and I hate to use this expression, the little woman on the farm to write an email to you?
Well, the little woman on the farm, I'm finding out here as the litigation is progressing, is not so much a little woman on the farm. She's become very involved with this thing. At the beginning, the perception was, I really don't know anything what's going on, and all of that was going on at the beginning, where evidence is certainly starting to show otherwise. Let me just put that lightly here, and I'll get into the litigation aspects here in just a second. But in that same email, she explicitly stated that I was, quote, these are her words, so misled by Posner. These are her words, his wife. She said I was so misled. So this is the basis of the litigation. It's a breach of contract case, and I have evidence in addition to the evidence that I have about being misled by Posner. His own wife said it. It's in writing. And these lawyers, now he's hired several, he's got lawyers in New York, Chicago, and Indiana battling me in the case here now. And a lot of people are saying, whoa, he's got all these lawyers. Why doesn't he just pay you the $170,000 that he owes you? Because lawyers will chew that up real quick.
Right.
And he's got a bunch of them in 3 different states. So this thing has bad faith written all over it. And so we're in federal court with it right now, and there's some games being played here. These lawyers now are seemingly they're looking for technicalities now to try to get the case dismissed. They actually have a motion to dismiss that was filed on August 22nd, 2022, and they're moving for technicalities to get it dismissed, which they have basically no business doing. Actually, it shouldn't go anywhere. But the problem is, the judge in the case, her name is Teresa Springman. She sat on the motion for well over 8 months, didn't make any rulings. Now, keep in mind, during this entire time period, I cannot conduct discovery. There's an order. As long as this motion is pending, you can't do discovery. You have to wait until the motion is resolved. So for over 8 months now, while this judge is sitting on the motion, I can't conduct discovery. And there's a whole lot of discovery where I could be receiving a lot of information that could be helpful in the case.
Mm-hmm.
So on May 8th, 2023, I filed a memorandum to the court for the inordinate time for the ruling. And I expressed in my memorandum to the judge that this is not reasonable. It's well over 8 months now. That this is not a type of a motion that should take this amount of time. Even a motion for summary judgment, which is a much more complex motion than a motion to dismiss, those don't take nearly 8 months. And this is just unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
So I pointed out to her, I said, hey, you're really prejudicing my case. I can't conduct discovery. Everything's been briefed. Make a ruling.
Right.
So I filed that on May 8th. And then on May 10th, 2 days later, after I filed that memorandum, she refers the motion to the magistrate. She passes the buck to the magistrate now. She could have done that 8 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
She could have done that when their motion was originally filed more than 8 months ago. She waited until I drew the issue to her attention. So I'm concerned about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me also add in something that is a major concern to me is right off the bat, after I filed the complaint, and then I filed an amended complaint thereafter, adding in some more facts to the case, then their lawyers, in their response, in a motion to dismiss, in this particular motion to dismiss that I'm discussing here, the very first sentence in their response to the judge was they reminded the judge that Judge Posner is a former retired Court of Appeals judge for 36 years on the federal judiciary. And they called it with a highly distinguished record. But the point is this: Posner is being sued as he's a defendant, not in his capacity as a judge. He entered into an agreement with me, an individual thing between two individuals. This was not as a judge. It had nothing to do with him being a judge. He's not being sued as a judge. So what this was this was a wink to the judge from his team of lawyers. Now, remember the defendant here is Richard Posner, a retired member of the federal judiciary. That was a message to the judge without question. So I responded in kind, and I told the judge, we all know why that was brought into the issue here, because these lawyers are trying to favor Curry with the court because he was a judge. And that's not the court's business to be walking into a situation, well, I got to show favoritism to the judge. That's why they brought this up. They put it in writing. That was a message to the judge. And then I pointed out also to the judge, well, since they called him such a distinguished judge for all those years, I pointed out some things that weren't very distinguished that he has done while he was a judge. For example, in an interview with the New York Times in September of 2017, he told the New York Times, and I quote, I pay very little attention to legal rules, statutes, constitutional provisions. And then he went on to say, when you have a Supreme Court case or something similar, they're often extremely easy to get around. Now, a judge is obligated to pay a great deal of attention to legal rules and statutes and constitutional provisions,
Right,
and to
because
follow Supreme Court precedent.
right.
He said he pays very little attention to it.
Now,
So
I don't
that's
know.
certainly
Should the taxpayers know that he's paying little attention to these things?
well, let me tell you, we should actually do a show on that, because the taxpayers should be paying attention to what's going on with
Right.
situations like this, because there are ways to remedy these things that the public could actually utilize if they were willing to do it and had enough information about it, which I think we can provide to them. So
Mhm.
maybe we can do a show on that here down the road.
Yeah.
And also, he said on March 7, 2018, to Legal Talk Network, this was in a live interview, quote, "Well, I am a maverick and I don't really like rules." Well, a judge is supposed to follow rules.
Mhm.
So what is distinguished about that with Posner? And he also told Law and Liberty in an article, quote, "A judicial ruling need not be supported by reason. Or judicial ruling need not be supported by reason." And he also said, "Judges are confused by moral language."
Uh-oh.
And he also said, quote, "I don't think the word fair has any content at all. I don't think the word fair has any content at all." Well, that pretty much says it all with regard to my case, because what he did to me, he hoodwinked me into working for him, giving me a title of executive director, working and asking to work for him in his personal capacity.
Mhm.
And then when it came time to pay, he got he thought, well, you know what? I received all the services. I'm not going to pay him. And that's what, when he said he didn't think the word fair has any content, that's exactly what he did to me.
Mhm.
So is it fair then to commit fraud to somebody by having them convince them to work for you for payment? Is that fair? No. And that's exactly what he said. He didn't think the word fair has any content at all. So I've addressed all that with the judge in the case here. So, we're going to have to see what happens here. So, I mean, I'm actually getting ready to file some more motions with this judge, but I actually asked this judge. I filed a motion. Um, I filed a motion on May 17th, just a few days ago, for the judge to disqualify and recuse herself.
Mhm.
And 2 days later, on May 19th, the judge Springman, she denied the recusal motion. And
Typical.
yeah, of course, they all do that. They hardly ever want to admit that they're wrong. I mean, that hardly ever happens, if ever. And she used the excuse, the reason that she the reason that she didn't make the ruling for well over 8 months. I mean, it was basically laughable. She said it was because of COVID.
Oh,
COVID's been over for what, a couple of years anyway now.
yeah.
And she actually used that as an excuse for why she didn't make the ruling. And
Uh,
I pointed out in the motion for recusal, I told her in the motion, you have allowed yourself to be walked into what him and his lawyers walked you into when they reminded you that this was a retired federal court of appeals judge. And I cited several canons of judicial conduct rules that applied to her in this situation, where rulings, they actually state in the judicial canons that judges must make prompt rulings, that they have to do them in a prompt manner and so forth. And certainly over 8 months is not a prompt matter. So I cited all of that. And it also says that any appearance of impropriety, the judge must, recuse themselves. Well, to me, I think appearance of impropriety is written all over her because of what the lawyers asked her to do. She did it. I mean, she actually accommodated them by not making the ruling, and then only after I filed the memorandum and specifically addressed it to her, then let's pass it over to the magistrate. Let's pass the buck and kick the can down the road. That's not justice. And we've all heard the old saying, justice delayed.
It's
Justice denied is justice justice delayed is justice denied. We've all heard that, and that's exactly what's happening.
I'm so
So,
sorry.
so it's it's a very sorry state of affairs. Courts are supposed to be there to help people resolve their problems. If they can't resolve them between one another, go to court, you get the facts out, you put the evidence in, and at some point then under our federal laws, we have a Seventh Amendment for jury trials in this country, which would be a show in itself, because the overwhelming majority of people in the country, the litigants, aren't getting their jury trials. Cases are being dismissed at a very alarming rate in this country, as though there is no Seventh Amendment. So I will be reminding this judge when these things continue on here that I'm entitled to a jury trial here, and the games have to stop, and we need to get this thing into the trial here. And and something else that's concerning here is during as part of Posner's motions to dismiss, he filed some IRS documents, Internal Revenue Service documents, as evidence, and that he thought was going to help him. And the IRS documents are actually showing fraud committed by Posner. The IRS documents, in connection to the Posner Center, where they were required to file information with the IRS, the IRS documents specifically required Posner to list the officials of the Posner Center. It required him to identify by name the officials of the center. And guess whose name was not listed? Yes, Brian Vukadinovich, the executive director. The executive director, Brian Vukadinovich, was not listed. So when I saw that is very substantial evidence of his fraud, because if he hired me as the executive director and I was supposed to be paid for doing that work, and then the IRS, and everybody knows you're not supposed to, it's actually a crime to lie to the IRS. When you don't disclose required information, and he chose not to list my name, that's a major red flag that the whole thing was bogus. It was fraud from the beginning. So I can't believe that they actually filed that. They somehow just passed over that, didn't realize it was in there. But I'm actually happy that they put that in there. And see, again, now, if we were doing discovery, I would be getting a whole lot of this type of information, which would be helpful. So who knows what's out there, which is where this judge, by this inordinate time period, is really prejudicing my case. The litigant, the plaintiffs, are obligated to prove their case, and it makes it very hard when the courts are doing something that's making it almost impossible for you to prove the case by not allowing you to conduct the discovery. And also another problem with the IRS document is they also, Posner stated, and his wife also signed the document. We were talking about his wife earlier, where she comes into play here now. She signed the document as his power of attorney, so she's representing him, and she signed that IRS document where my name was not shown on there. And also that same document also explicitly states that no employees of the Posner Center were paid a salary. It states no employees were paid a salary. And then, as soon as I saw that, there was another red flag, because I knew for a fact that there was an employee that I knew of. Now, I didn't know how his arrangements were with all the other employees. I didn't know. I didn't ask. He never told me. So I don't know what his arrangements were with other employees in the center. But I do know this, because he called me and asked me to come to Chicago when he was interviewing a lady to be, I believe it was for the research director position.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went up to Chicago, and then we had the meeting. He did the interview. I sat in on it. And then we actually went to lunch afterwards and so forth. And he agreed. They negotiated the salary and the conditions of what she was going to be doing and so forth, working for him. And then I can't remember exactly how much money was involved, but it was several $1,000s a month that he was to pay her. So then she was being paid for, several months. She was being paid. She did the work. She was being paid.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, her and Posner had a fallout of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And then she threatened to sue him for lost wages because he wasn't paying her. He stopped paying her. So after she threatened to sue him, she was then paid $8,020. She received a check for $8,020. So I knew about that when I read what they said in the IRS document. And then later on in that same IRS document, under supplementary information type of a section, it states that there was a former employee that received $8,020 in a settlement, but it didn't say what the settlement was for. A settlement could be for a lot of different things. It could be you fell and slipped, somebody tripped you or whatever. It could be a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
But the settlement was for because he did not pay her wages. So they left that part out.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did when I addressed that IRS document with the judge, and I explained to her that not only is Posner and his lawyers bringing fraudulent arguments, legal arguments here into the court, stating to the court no employees were paid any money and so forth. And I pointed out how that statement was made on the IRS document that they said that no employees were paid, and yet at the bottom of the document, it states that there was an employee that was paid $8,020 in a settlement. I pointed out to the judge that was for lost wages.
Mm-hmm.
And if the court would like, it should hold a hearing, and we should put that person on the stand, and we can examine that person, and we can cut to the chase here with all of this, instead of all this nonsense with these lawyers. And see, they've been trying to get slick here. I've detailed all this in great detail with the judge, and they would like to skip over that part of things. They don't want to address that issue. It's fraud. It's fraud on the court, and it's fraud on the IRS by Posner and his wife, who signed the document, and also his lawyers bringing fraudulent arguments into the court. So the merits of the case, hands down, I'm going to win on the merits. Problem is, we have a judge here who has been reminded that Posner is a former federal court of appeals judge, and we all know why that was a wink to the judge, and what's expected of the judge here. And it seems by that over 8-month time period, the judge seems to be playing ball here, it looks like, which is concerning here. So if this judge rules on the merits, I'm going to win. But if this judge decides to go ahead and play these games because of his position as a former federal court of appeals judge, then I probably won't. And then you have to go through all of the nonsense with appeals, and then you got other judges making decisions on behalf of a brethren judge, a fellow judge from the past and so forth. That's the problem that we're having in our country.
Right.
Very difficult to get a fair court proceeding based on a person's standing, in terms of his wealth, in terms of his influence, if a regular person sues a major corporation or a government agency or a person of influence, as I'm suing Richard Posner here, a former federal court of appeals judge, it's very difficult to get justice in the courts, and that's actually a crime against the people in this country, I'm sorry to say.
Mhm.
But I will, I'm probably the last person that the court should expect to sit down, stand down, and lay low with this, because that will not happen. I will address it publicly and in court, and I will address it as we're doing here in this interview. I'm not afraid to call out judicial unfairness and judicial corruption, and judges who admittedly say they don't follow the rules, they don't like the rules, they pay very little attention to rules and statutes and so forth. And keep in mind, every litigant who has ever appeared in front of Posner when he was a judge, all of the cases are based on law and the rules and the statutes and precedent. And to have a judge who openly admitted that he pays very little attention to rules and statutes, that's not right. That's not right. I'm actually surprised that there hasn't been a groundswell of motions filed after he made those statements. Hey, listen, this was not a fair proceeding. This judge who made a decision in this case said he doesn't pay any attention to rules and statutes and so forth. And by the way, as far as his lawyer Robert Kaufman, saying that Posner didn't have the legal capacity when he entered into the contract with me in 2018, well, then what about his capacity to make decisions right before he retired, which was shortly before that? He was on the bench making decisions in court cases. So what about his legal capacity then? So there's big problems here that honestly the judiciary should be digging into. And, all of those people that had cases in front of him deserve fair hearings on their cases.
I mean, this could open up a big can of worms. This could have litigants coming back wanting recourse. And I mean, he's better off paying you what he owes you instead of opening up a huge can of worms.
You're exactly right, Marianne, and those litigants are entitled to bring this issue up and get recourse on this. They're absolutely entitled to that. And now I gave him fair opportunity to pay me what he owed me, and we would be done. He chose not to, and then he chose to get this lawyer in Chicago and play the games with me, which was a bad move. Bringing that nonsense in about, he didn't have the legal capacity, and yet he's doing all these other things at the same time. And then, so, as they say, you make your bed, now you got to lie in it. So I gave him a fair opportunity, and I told him that, this was gonna, if you don't pay what you owe me, this is gonna, we're gonna end up in litigation with this. And now we're in litigation. And I'm very firm about principle of things, and I intend now to take this into trial. I told the other, when I did my other federal case, the jury trial, I told the judge, they tried to settle the case with me just on the eve of the trial for $150,000, and I turned it down. I told the judge, it was a federal judge. I said, no, sometimes money isn't the issue. Sometimes the actual issues are important that need to be addressed. And sometimes principle is a very important thing, and principle is a very important thing. So you had your opportunity to do the right thing and settle the case, and you chose not to. And now these lawyers all over New York, Chicago, and Indiana, they're all playing games here. So I intend to have a jury trial, and the information that's going to come out, if this judge does the right thing and denies their motion to dismiss, and then I can conduct my discovery, I'm very confident that I'm going to obtain a whole lot of other information in addition to what I stated here earlier. and they're going to have big problems at the trial. And there's going to be probably a lot of other things that are going to surface at the trial that's going to look bad for Posner, and as you say, will very potentially open up a major can of worms. The judiciary does not want this to happen because the judiciary operates in secret. We all know that, and we all know how the judiciary protects itself. And the judiciary, I'm the last person on the planet that the judiciary wants to see a jury trial with me taking on a federal judge and exposing the corruption that goes on within the judiciary and how this judge conducted himself. So that's where we're at with this right now. So this judge, I'm keeping an eye on this judge here. She refused to recuse herself. So, I can't do anything about that right now, but I'm certainly going to be watching everything that's going forward in the case with her actions, with her rulings and so forth. And I'll be addressing those as necessary as we go along in court and also in public forums. So that's what will happen here. The people deserve to know what's going on, and the people should not be subjected to such judicial corruption that is absolutely taking place in the country, as I wrote about in my recent book, Rogues in Black Robes. I have a lot of information in there about judicial corruption. I've talked about a lot of judges in there and so forth. And so be ready, because it's going to come out. It's starting to trickle out little by little right now as we speak. So if we have a trial, and by the way, Reuters, we all know Reuters is a major worldwide news organization. They've written several articles about this case already with involving Posner with his breach of contract issue with me. So Reuters is already on this. So if we have a jury trial, a federal jury trial in federal court, and Reuters and other news organizations are covering it, the judiciary is going to have a whole lot to be concerned about. Trust me.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I mean, even with my own federal case, which was a complete disaster, when a judge admits to not reading your evidence and ruling it irrelevant. And then you have to file a motion to make him read this evidence, which he did probably in one day, and I got a dismissal.
I know where you're going. Well, Marianne, see what happened to you. As you said, the judge ruled your evidence irrelevant. That's very disturbing, because who should be making the determination on the evidence? A jury. A jury should be making the determinations on evidence. If evidence is not strong, or if it is strong, or if it's irrelevant, the jury, the fact finder, that's the judges are, according to the law, the judges are to make rulings on law. The fact finder, the jury, is to make rulings on the facts, on the evidence, not judges. And what this judge did to you, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, because I say it a lot. This was a cockroach judge.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he's a magistrate.
A magistrate. And by the way, which the judge in my case just passed it over to the magistrate. I did not consent to a magistrate. Now, at the beginning of a case, you're asked, do you consent or not consent? I just never do. But they do have the right to make a recommendation. I checked all that out. They have a right to they can't make a ruling, but they have the right. The regular judge can pass it to the magistrate for a report and a recommendation. And then the judge, by rule, then can either adopt the recommendation or reject it. That's how that works.
Right.
So go ahead.
That's why I was wondering. Okay, so the magistrate's going to read this over. It should just go to the judge.
The judge.
I thought.
Well, the judge ultimately is the only one that can make the decision. The actual ruling, that's the rule. So remember now, This motion was filed well over 8 months ago. The judge could have actually done that referred it for the recommendation 8 months ago. And only until after I filed the memorandum, well, I'm going to pass it over to the magistrate. And even so, whatever the magistrate recommends, the judge either accepts it or rejects it. The judge has to make the ruling in the end anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's almost bureaucratic in nature
Mm-hmm.
and unnecessary. To me, the judge is the judge making, well over $100,000 a year to be a judge, to make rulings on the case. Make the ruling. Make the ruling. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to have magistrates be involved with rulings on discovery, issues and so forth, fine and dandy. But when it comes time to making the actual ruling on the case, on the merits, that should be the judge doing that and nobody else. And it's just another form of nonsense by the judiciary. We have too many layers of things going on, and then people wonder, why does it take so long for
Right.
cases to get, and that's another show by itself. Trust me, I
Right.
mean, I got a lot to say about
Well,
that.
I may have told you that during this case of mine, as I was dropping off evidence to the attorneys representing the corporations and the corporation and the two caseworkers, he hauled me into the boardroom and said, "Look, I know you've been to court, but I'm going to tell you how this case is going to go. I'm going to get this case dismissed because I know both those judges at the federal courthouse. So that's pretty much how it's going to go."
Well,
I
yes.
said, "Okay, have a nice day." And I dropped, off, these records, whatever. And then I went and filled out an affidavit of everything he said, and I filed it also to the U.S. Supreme Court Disciplinary Board because I think they should know that this is how this attorney's behaving. And of course, I got a namby-pamby letter back, and I called the U.S. Supreme Court Disciplinary Board back, and I said, "I'm not really happy with this." So the guy was really nice on the phone. He said, "Write a more detailed letter, make it more detailed." So I did, and that actually got that attorney into trouble. I was
Oh,
actually
really?
shocked. I was shocked.
No, you did a great job then, because almost in all cases, they just, blow those things off and they accept what happened. And it's just part of the game that's played. So you did really good there. You did an outstanding job with that, Marianne, honestly, actually, because that very seldom happens. And it's a shame what you had to listen to from that lawyer. See, those lawyers are emboldened. They already know, oh, I'm battling a pro se litigant. The judges don't like them. Posner said they consider them trash.
Mhm.
So they feel like they can, get away with that and they do it all the time. And then you did a great job, Marianne. I'm very impressed by that. Honestly, I was almost expecting you to say, well, they just blew it off. So you obviously did a very good job with it.
Well,
So
the thing was, when I went back to deliver more evidence, because I was just making copies of transcripts that I'm sure they didn't have, and
right.
anyway, so there was two secretaries sitting there, and she said, "Well, I'll call him for you. I'll let him know, you're here." And so he comes down the hall and he says to me in front of them, "We're going to talk right here, out here, because you got me in trouble the last time you were here." I said, "What? You know what?" He said, "You said things that weren't true." And I smiled at him like
Uh,
this. And I said, no, everything I said was true." I mean, I felt like I was talking to a fourth grader. He says, "No, that was not true. That's not what I said." And I said, "Yes, everything you said was true. But here's these exhibits. Have a nice day."
I love it. I love it. In the end, the fact that he came up to you after the fact and again tried to chastise you, oh, what you said wasn't true. Generally, lawyers wouldn't know the truth or care about the truth if it hit them in the face.
Right,
And he
right.
knew what the truth was. But see, they're used to they're almost like trained monkeys almost. This is how we do things. I think they're almost trained in law school on how to operate,
Yeah.
how to do things like that.
Mhm.
And then that's what it's almost like you set up a computer to do a certain thing. This is how they're programmed. And they're not used to it when somebody fights back, and very much not used to it when somebody fights back and actually prevails like you did.
Mhm.
So my hat is off to you on that, because
Oh,
I
thank you.
honestly did not think that that was going to be the end result when, when you
I
were
didn't either. I mean, I
telling
didn't
us
either.
about it. So you did a great thing actually with that. They need to be put in their place. And a lot
Mhm.
of people, unlike you and I, are afraid to take on the lawyers. They allow them, they get intimidated, and I don't understand that. I mean, lawyers, it's just, I mean, it's a person who happened to have enough money to go to law school and get a degree. They get no special privileges to go out and abuse people and
Oh,
be condescending to people. That's all they do.
well, my
So,
yeah,
I wish people would do more of what you just did here. Even if you know ahead of time, probably that you're not going to get anywhere with it, do it anyway. Get it
right,
on record. Get it
right.
on record.
And luckily, I'm used to years of verbal abuse. So, I mean, whatever you say to me is only going to hurt my one feeling I have left.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, like I'm like you. I mean, you know what? Game on. You want to
yeah.
play that game? Game on. This is, I'm not going to sit still for it. We're going to address it. There's a procedure for it. And you did it. You followed the procedure, and he didn't like it. And he
Yeah.
obviously didn't like it because he let you know that he didn't like it, which
Mhm.
should make you even feel better. You should feel better that he
Mhm.
came to you after the fact and cried about it like a crybaby.
Aw.
That's what he was. He was a crybaby. He
Mhm.
was he was an idiot in the first place. He got called out. Absolutely. You know,
Well, yeah. Well, I say I had argued against him in the lower court because I filed in the lower court to get this to go into the federal court because I heard that was a procedure you have to do. And so the judge I was before, believe it or not, married my ex and his wife who works in the courthouse. So I tried to get her recused. She would not recuse herself. And I thought, okay. So this is sitting around for many, many months, kind of like yours, sitting around. And I filed a motion to compel to get this hearing date. Okay, so we got this hearing date. So in walks this attorney, and he actually lied in front of about myself and my dad, and saying that my father wrote an affidavit that they were interviewed. And I just normally I'm poker face, but at this point I looked at like it's like, no, I
yeah,
can't wait
I
for my time to
understand.
talk. So the judge, I don't understand why she gives him, 20 minutes to talk. Then she tells me, okay, I have a hearing coming up. I can
Yeah,
only let you talk for 5 minutes. I
yeah.
said,
I don't have time for you. I've got plenty
right.
of time for the lawyer
Oh,
to
yeah.
sit here with his nonsense, but I don't have time for you, the
Yeah.
actual litigant.
So
Yeah, that's how they operate.
I said to her, Your Honor, I can do this. And so I read off a whole bunch of stuff. And then I said, as far as the affidavit, my father, and I went like this because he was sitting in the back of the courtroom. I said, my father signed an affidavit stating he was never interviewed by the caseworker. So attorney, uh, you know, Jerry Garcia totally misspoke. You know what I'm saying?
Well, good for you. Good for you. At
Oh,
least
yeah.
you got it on the record.
Yeah.
And that was Garcia was his name?
Yeah. I just call him that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we as a society, we're subjected to this nonsense on a daily basis in the courts.
Mhm.
And we should thank you for standing up as you did. And that should be an example to everybody watching this interview right now. Stand up. Do not be abused by lawyers or even judges.
Mhm.
Stand up and be heard. Because if you sit back, it just goes on and on and on. Nothing ever happens. But if you stand up like you did, and if enough people would do that, we would have a more fair system. And
Right.
and so I
Yeah,
mean,
I think people should speak up. I think you should not be afraid to speak up because I talk clear and plain to the judge because when I discussed my case, I actually leaned back in the chair like this.
letting them know. Yeah, I
Yeah,
got
and
it.
as I spoke, kind of like in that movie with Joe Pesci in it.
Oh, my cousin
Yeah,
Vinny,
yes.
great movie.
And so I think she may have underestimated me, and I think and she allowed me to win. She said, "This case is going to I'm going to allow her to go to federal court. Well, the attorney had a problem. He did not want to do that. He said,
Right.
Your Honor, this, that, and the other thing. She says, well, you can rehash that and relive that in the federal court.
Well, good for you, because she probably realized Marianne Petrie is not going to allow this nonsense. She's going to stand up. She's going to make it a little bit tougher for me as a judge here. So I'll just kind of accommodate this a little bit too, and just let it go to another court. But actually good for her for doing that, actually, instead of just screwing you over in the end, like most of them actually, will do.
Yeah.
So you did good, Marianne. You did very good, honestly.
Well, if I had gotten screwed over, I just would have appealed it and just kept going.
Yeah. Well, you did good. I mean, I'm very impressed with how you stood up. And people across the country need to see that and understand that, because it's very seldom that litigants do that, actually. I mean, anybody, a man, a woman, stand up, for heaven's sakes. Speak up.
Right. Say it
do
out, get it on the record, and say it twice to make sure it's on the record if you have to.
Absolutely. And you did it, and it shows that it can be done. And, we could probably sometime down the road maybe even discuss that in more detail on how people can actually go about, redressing their grievances with what's going on with them, on how they're being treated and so forth, and how judges and lawyers are given a pass for the most part for mistreating litigants.
Oh,
So
definitely.
There's a lot, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think there's a lot. I really love your show. I've seen your other shows, your other interviews, and I really love your show and how you approach things. And I want your audience to realize that you're doing a great thing here with in how you're discussing, because there's a lot of people that aren't like you, that a lot of times, I mean, I've done several interviews on other shows and so forth, and a lot of times it's like you almost have, well, this is this kind of a topic, we don't want to upset judges, and so forth. Well, if you're gonna not be if you're gonna be worried about upsetting a judge or offending a judge based on the truth, then I'm the last person you should have on the show, because I'm going to tell it like it is. And that's why you have such a great show. You're actually doing that. You're bringing this information to the forefront so the public can understand and be educated on what's going on. So you're doing a great thing, Marianne. You honestly are. And I'm not just saying that. Everybody who knows me knows I tell it like it is. And you're doing a great job.
Well, thank you.
Honestly are.
Thank you. I mean, I'm one of the pro se dads that I talked to. I told him, I said, let it rip. Say what you have to say and get everything on that record. And he did so well. And he called me afterwards, and he was just so happy. And actually, he felt relieved saying what he had to say.
Right.
It's almost like therapy. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, as I said earlier, even if you feel going in, you're probably not going to be able to prevail, they're going to cover themselves, do it anyway, because it gives you some relief. At least I stood up. If you're on a sports team going in, sometimes you got an opponent, it's going to be very difficult to beat. And you may not beat them, but if you go in there and you do what you got to do, you can walk away, you can walk off the floor of the field. Hey, listen, I did my best, and that's how it works. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and you feel good about it.
Right.
Same thing in litigation.
And I was so proud of him. His name is Jim Schock. I've done several podcasts with him, and he's got a case from hell with a judge from hell.
Yeah,
who has the first name of myself. But anyway,
I can well imagine.
He's doing very well. And it's because of speaking up and standing up for yourself, because I don't think they see this coming. They think you're gonna, be like a dog with the tail between the legs, and that ain't happening with me.
And guess what? In this country, we have something in this country. It's called the First Amendment. And the First Amendment, the freedom of speech to express yourself, applies to judicial proceedings. Pleadings that are filed are covered under the First Amendment. So when something happens in court, you have a right to publicly discuss under the First Amendment. Now, sometimes judges will issue gag orders on evidence and so forth. But generally speaking, you do have, and actually right now, as we speak, all that's going on with Trump right now with all the stuff in his case, because he's been mouthing off about a lot of stuff and, trying to influence, evidence and so forth. But Uh, Hey, by the way, Marianne, if it's okay, I missed one thing I was going to point out during the
Oh, go ahead.
litigation, if it's okay. It's
Yeah,
about a minute or so here, okay?
sure.
Uh, just a few days ago, we're talking about the case against Posner. Just a few days ago, a person wrote an ex parte letter to the judge in my case, Judge Springman. Ex parte is a communication that is not supposed to happen outside the presence. You're not supposed to contact judges and discuss cases
Mm.
outside of the presence of the parties that are involved. In other words, you can't do it on the sly. Okay. So this person who claims to be a close friend of Posner and his family, he claimed in this email to the judge just a few days ago, uh, called me names and how dare I sue the judge. He's a close friend of his. His name is William Bond, and he he murdered his father. He's a murderer.
Mhm.
He bludgeoned his father with a hammer,
Oh my
and
God.
then he changed his name later, and then he was courting some lady, and then he told his potential father-in-law that he should read about him and his when he was done, and he was trying to shake him down for money. There was a court opinion on this that I
Oh
read,
no.
and the court said that he tried to shake down his potential father-in-law, and he claims to be a close friend of Posner. Now, Posner had represented him in some kind of a court case earlier, but whether or not that constitutes being a close friend. So then the judge, after receiving that email, gave opportunity to respond to it. So I responded in kind, and I put all this in there in the response about how he was a murderer
Mhm.
and tried to extort his potential father-in-law and so forth.
Oh my
And then
God.
just a couple of days ago, then the lawyers, their response was that Posner and his lawyers did not have notice of the email, and that the email is irrelevant to the issues in the litigation.
Mm.
Well, but guess what? Now it's on record in a federal court case that Posner purportedly is a close friend of a murderer who bludgeoned his father to death. So, I
Wow.
mean, when we get into trial here, there's going to be a whole lot of things that are going to come out here. And
Mhm.
I mean, it was just when I read that email, like, I mean, clearly you could tell this was a lunatic.
Right.
And I don't, what you're writing an email, an expert, and then he signs it. He signs the email. His name is William Bond, and he signs the email. Generally, a business type communication, you're going to put your first and last name at the end of it.
Mm.
He signs it at the end, Bill. Like, I just, but when I saw that, so you're a close personal friend, you're a murderer, and the
Mhm.
judge is a close personal friend of yours. Well,
Oh no.
so be it. So be it.
Well, a similar thing happened in my case. The sister of the wife who works in the courthouse, who's married to my ex, wrote a letter to the judge that was she didn't send it to his chambers. She sent it to his home residence.
Oh boy.
Okay, now, okay, so this letter was, I'm not kidding you, a page and almost a half long, berating him for letting me see my kids unsupervised every other weekend. God forbid, because I'm so dangerous and mentally ill and deranged. Okay, so anyway, I went to a phone book. I thought, yeah, is he in the phone book? No, he's not in the phone book. Okay, isn't it odd that she had his home residence? Oh, but her sister works in the courthouse. Isn't that how it
Right.
works?
Right. And of course, the sister, I don't know how far that went, but of course the sister, I don't know anything about it. Of course. Did you ever
Well,
find out? Did you pursue that?
well, I we my lawyer was actually thrilled this letter was written.
Hmm.
But the judge was ticked off. He called my lawyer and the other lawyer and said that no one is to send any correspondence to his residence. He was ticked off. And that's as far as it went. That's as far as it went.
Yeah. Yeah, well, see, at least that judge put that out in an order, right? You are
Well,
not to contact the judge.
no, he just yelled at
He
everybody.
just said it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he didn't sign anything. He didn't put anything into writing. There's a lot of things he didn't sign and put into writing,
Right.
and he did a lot of things that were questionable. And then he died of pancreatitis. So I question what medications he was on when he was handling my custody trial.
Well, Marianne, that's really a good point. And that's something that, again, I know I keep saying we could do a show on that, but we could do a show on that because really we need to question the fitness of judges out there. Actually, I mean, I've written, I've written about there's a big problem in the legal profession
Mhm.
with alcoholism. There's a real big problem with that. I wrote a blog about that on my website.
I can understand
And
that.
I think I wrote about that in my first book as well.
Mhm.
And so lawyers, they actually there's some kind of an organization that's set up by I think it's with the American Bar Association where they get counseling and so forth. It's such a big problem that they have this special counseling thing, and judges. I mean, judges. How do we know that the judge isn't an alcoholic and was on a out on a drinking binge the night before a hearing or whatever? How do we know that? How do we know that the judge is not a substance abuser? How do
Yeah,
we know that?
that's why they
Uh,
should be randomly drug tested.
Absolutely. There should be a yearly drug test on every judge, state and federal in the country.
How
There
about
should
every
be,
3 months, random?
or
They don't
I
see
would
it
be
coming.
fine. I would be fine with
Hey,
every
as a
month.
taxpayer, I would love to pay for that. That's something I
Absolutely.
don't have a problem paying for. I think these judges should be drug tested and they should have psychological evals, perhaps forensic psychological evaluations, at
Yeah.
least. What do you think? Every 2 years?
I agree 100%, Marianne, and I'll even go a step further. And I wrote about this in my recent book. I believe that judges should also be required to take a yearly polygraph test. I believe
Ooh.
that because what that would show and you wouldn't have to ask a whole lot of questions. See, my concern is I think I've talked before about Gaylord in Cook County in Chicago from years back, how they actually did a sting operation and they found out about judges taking bribes and so forth. Well, does anybody think that that ended in Gaylord back in the 80s? How do we know that the judge you have in your particular case isn't on the take? We don't know that. We absolutely don't know that. If the judge had to take a yearly polygraph test and was asked, have you ever met in private with any parties in the case? Have you ever met in private with any lawyers in the case?
They'd
Have
all
you ever,
fail.
they would all fail. Have you ever accepted any money,
Oh,
on
oh.
the side involving a case? That's the only way that we could be sure that the judges are not corrupt in that way.
Mhm.
And what you recommended on the drug testing and so forth, we should also have some type of confidence that the judges are actually sane, that they have their mental faculties,
Mhm.
and that they're fit, they're able to make decisions, they're
Mhm.
not drugged up
Mhm.
or alcoholed up or whatever you want to, in any way, shape, or form, and anything altering your mind.
Right.
We're paying a lot of money. All judges generally, all federal judges make well over $100,000 a year. All federal judges do, and most state court judges. It's state by state with state court judges, but almost all state court judges are making over $100,000 a year. A year, they have an office, they have a staff. The taxpayers pay for all of that. We should have confidence that our taxpayer money paying for all those high salaries and so forth, that these judges are actually fit to be there, and we don't know that. And quite frankly, there's a big question whether or not there's not a big problem with that actually.
Well, actually, the taxpayers are funding them to torture us. They're
And that's why you're exactly right, Marianne. And that's why the taxpayers should be paying attention to what you and I are saying here on this show right now, what we're saying. They should be paying attention. And again, there's a lot of things that the taxpayers can do that, would require, a long conversation. I mean, I've written about them. There's a lot of things that can be done. See, you can actually remove judges. Of course, politics comes into play, but there's a way to do that. And if people would pressure, the right politicians that are in charge of actually putting judges on the bench and so forth, by bombarding them with emails, public letters to the editor and so forth, we can put pressure on these politicians to actually put, there's actually rules that you can have judges removed. The problem is we don't take advantage of those rules. We let those rules just sit there, and we, the taxpayers, the public, should actually be insisting that those rules be enforced. We should have clean judges on the judiciary. Mm-hmm. We should not have corrupt judges that are taking bribes, and we should not have judges who are high on drugs or mm-hmm. on alcohol or on any other type of substance on the judiciary. And we do. We know we do. We mm-hmm. just don't know who they are. And we should know who they are. Mm-hmm. A lot of businesses have polygraph tests for their employees to check random drug tests and so mm-hmm. forth. And the courts have approved that.
Well, for doctors and nurses, police.
Exactly. Well, so why do the judges get a pass on that? Actually, they should be the first ones that should, be required to have to do it because of the significance of what they do, how it affects society, their rulings and so forth. So, but that's what, that's what our country is. We need to, we have a very corrupt judicial system and we need to do something about it. I'm doing my part. You're certainly doing your part. We need other people to step in here and do their part as well. And we could affect some change. I believe.
Right. And my judge, in what condition he was in, God knows, but he always threatened me with jail. Do you want me to send you to the 4th floor? Because that's where the sheriff's department was, where all the hot guys are.
Right.
And I'm like, it's like, oh, well, this is now the 4th time you said this to me, and you never had the kahunas to do it.
I'm outraged that the judge, that's a totally unacceptable form of intimidation mm-hmm. for a judge to utilize that type of a tactic. That judge should not be there. I'm sorry.
He's dead now.
Yeah. Well, he should have never been there in the first place.
Definitely.
That's just totally unacceptable. And we have to blame the judicial process for allowing that kind of conduct to take place. It happens, it happens all the time, and it's uncalled for. And they have all those rules. The judge shouldn't do this, the judge shouldn't do that, and they do it because mm-hmm. they know they can get away with it. Mm-hmm. It happens all the time.
Oh my goodness. I can't wait till our next podcast. So I could talk to you all afternoon. But
same here.
But how can people reach you if they have any questions?
Okay, Marianne, if people would go to my website, my email address is on there.
Okay.
And my website is www.brianvukadinovich.com. And then my email address is on there. It's motion for justice in no periods, just motion for justice at yahoo.com. And they can email. And then if they don't write that down right now or forget it, they can go to my website and it'll be on my website. I get, after our last interview, I got, some people emailed me mm-hmm. Like that. So I'm awesome. I'm happy. I like talking to people and so forth. And I get a lot of emails from people and so forth. And I talk to all of them. I truly do.
Excellent. Well, hey, don't jump off. Slam the Gavels, the podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I am your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again here in the future with Brian Vukadinovich, pro se litigant in the future, and other exciting guests. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you, Marianne. I very much enjoyed it, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.